Welcome to our channel, Startup Business Management, your trusted resource for practical management know-how. Subscribe and follow us.
In the previous video, we explored the concept of a startup and looked at the connotations of it. And now we will see some of the startup ecosystems of this world. Now let's look at the global context of the startup and startup ecosystems. While in the USA, the definition may not matter as much as the stage of a startup, it may not be the case with other countries. Certain regulatory frameworks may stipulate few parameters within which a company may be recognized or treated as a startup. Startup regulations can vary significantly from country to country. So founders should carefully analyze the legal requirements based on their specific business activities and target markets. CEO World Magazine 2024 ranked several countries in their startup friendliness using 5 parameters. 1. Human capital investment. 2. Research and development. 3. Entrepreneurial infrastructure. 4. Technical workforce. 5. Policy dynamics. So on these 5 parameters, United States stands number 1, followed by United Kingdom with second rank. Canada is also a very good destination for a lot of startups. It ranks 3, and Israel gives a lot of encouragement to startups, and they have an excellent startup ecosystem. So it's ranked number 4. India in the recent past has been doing very well in terms of giving encouragement to startups. So it moved from 13 in 2023 to rank number 5 in 2024. Germany also does very well in terms of the startup friendliness. Its rank is 6th. Poland, Malaysia, Sweden, and Denmark occupy the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th ranks. So what does this ranking mean? It helps the startup founders to understand the startup friendliness of a country and decide where to operate from. The startup ecosystems. In this session, I have covered 3 ecosystems. One is India. The second one is Singapore. Singapore, though it's not among the top 10 of the rankings we had seen, it attracted a lot of startups from India in the recent past, perhaps because not just the incentives provided by the Singapore government, but also certain taxation issues in India, which kind of forced some of the entrepreneurs to move out of the country and look at Singapore and geographically very close to the Indian market. And third is United States. Startups and the Indian context. The government of India has set up the Startup India scheme for encouraging and assisting startups by providing tax benefits, easier compliance, and fast-tracking intellectual property rights filings. When you have time, you should go to the website of Startup India and look at the scheme. There are already 149,000 startups which are already recognized by the Startup India scheme. So DPIIT recognition and the criteria. What is DPIIT? DPIIT stands for Department for Promotion of Industry and International Trade, and it's a government body which gives the recognition for startups. So what are the criteria? First, the company should be less than 10 years old. The company should be a private limited company or registered as a partnership firm or a limited liability partnership. It's a common practice in India to do some businesses under proprietorship. That's not accepted as a structure for DPIIT recognition. Annual turnover of the company should not exceed 100 crores, that is 1 billion Indian rupees, for any of the financial years since the incorporation of the company. Original entity. The entity should not have been formed by splitting up or reconstructing an already existing business. Innovative and scalable. Of course, this can be a subjective criteria, but nevertheless, just to avoid recognizing every new company as a startup, so what the DPIIT does is it has also introduced a new criteria, innovative and scalable. So these are the criteria for getting recognition as a startup in India under the Startup India scheme. What are the incentives and benefits if you are recognized as a startup under the Startup India scheme? Ease of compliance. Startups can do self-certification in labor and environmental compliances. Fast tracking of patent application. In fact, there is a waiver of fee. Income tax exemption for 3 consecutive financial years in the initial 10 years of operations. Opportunity to list products in government's e-marketplace and sell to the government organizations, departments, and PSUs. In fact, if you ask me, the last one is the most important and attractive incentive. Earlier, in sectors like defense, railways, and aerospace, the startups or any new company could barely think of entering into that sector because the business was largely confined to the public sector units. And public sector units have a standard policy in terms of vendor registration, and it used to take many years for companies to get into the list of vendors. Now, thanks to this Startup India scheme, even startups, as long as they are recognized as a startup under the scheme, they can get listed under the vendor list of these public sector units. So this is perhaps the best of all the incentives. Otherwise, for startups to get into these sectors, it was a humongous task. And now you can say that if you are introducing a product that is not available in the market and these public sector units have been importing such products or solutions, then you can think of providing them as a substitute for imports. No wonder that in defense, aerospace, there are a lot of startups which are coming up in India, even though the market is largely confined to the government. Now, Singapore. Singapore has an excellent ecosystem for startups, well supported by the government. The government's Startup SG is a launchpad and one-stop source for loans, grants, funding, and capability enhancement, as well as an entrepreneurial network. What is the criteria to avail some grants, tax incentives, and other benefits? The company should, of course, be registered and be operating from Singapore. The annual turnover should be less than 100 million Singapore dollars, and company should be of less than 200 employees. Coming to USA, USA has traditionally been the most favorite destination for startups. Startup ecosystem in the USA, like in many other countries, even in the United States, the Startup America was a White House initiative to begin with that was launched to accelerate high growth entrepreneurship throughout the nation. Through the legislation Startup Act 3.0, USA encourages startup companies in the United States through American tax, immigration, and regulatory policies. However, the US startup ecosystem is mostly driven by the private sector. Silicon Valley is the forerunner in developing a startup culture across the world and is almost synonymous with terms like innovation and startup. For fundraising, for skills, for technologies, one should look at USA as a destination to start a startup, but definitely not the tax incentives and benefits from the government. Summary. So we have seen that there is no universal definition of a startup. And when it comes to taking advantages of the incentives of the government, the startups or the founders should meet the criteria set by the local governments. Entrepreneurs shall opt for the best place of business based on the following parameters which impact the business and the company. First is the market potential. The second, of course, the business ecosystem.